3 months ago, my aunt accidentally sent me a video she was never supposed to send. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I pressed play. There they were, my parents, my brother, my aunt, and several relatives sitting around a dining table laughing. Then someone called me a pathetic failure. Another said, I should be grateful anyone still talked to me. Everyone laughed. What none of them knew was that for the last 6 years, I'd quietly been paying their mortgage payments, utility bills, medical expenses, and debts. So I said nothing. I simply stopped paying. Then I waited. I was halfway through cleaning my kitchen when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from my Aunt Denise. That alone wasn't unusual. She often sent family photos, holiday plans, or random recipes she thought everyone should try. Without thinking much about it, I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the message. There was no text, just a video attachment. Curious, I pressed play. The recording started inside my parents' dining room. Several relatives sat around the table eating dinner. My mother was there, my father, my younger brother, Aunt Denise, even a few cousins. It looked like one of their regular family gatherings. At first, I smiled. Then I heard my name. My brother laughed and shook his head. I still can't believe she's doing that job. Honestly, it's kind of sad. A cousin chuckled. She's always been a pathetic failure compared to everyone else. The room erupted with laughter. I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Then my father leaned back in his chair. She's lucky we still include her in family events. More laughter followed. My mother took a sip of her drink and added, she should be grateful anybody puts up with her. Nobody defended me. Nobody changed the subject. Nobody looked uncomfortable. They all laughed. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table and watched the rest of the video. Every comment felt heavier than the last. Years of criticism, years of judgment, years of smiling faces suddenly looked different. What made it worse was what none of them knew. For the past 6 years, I had quietly been helping every person in that video. Mortgage payments, medical bills, utility balances, emergency debt. Whenever a crisis appeared, I stepped in. Not because anyone asked publicly. Not because I wanted recognition. Because they were family. As the video ended, my phone remained silent. No apology followed. No explanation arrived. Just an accidental glimpse of what they truly thought about me. And for the first time in years, I stopped making excuses for them. Growing up, I always believed families helped each other. That belief followed me into adulthood, long after I realized my family rarely followed the same rule. The financial problems started gradually. First, my parents fell behind on their mortgage after my father lost a major client. They were embarrassed and insisted the situation was temporary. I quietly transferred the money needed to catch up. They promised to pay me back someday. Someday never came. A year later, my brother called in a panic. Credit card debt had spiraled out of control. Collection agencies were calling daily. He swore he had learned his lesson and only needed one chance to get back on track. I helped him too. Then came medical expenses when my mother needed treatment that insurance didn't fully cover. Then emergency home repairs after a storm damaged part of the roof. Then utility bills during difficult months. Every crisis seemed to arrive with perfect timing. And somehow I always became the solution. At first, I didn't mind. I had built a stable career. My income wasn't extraordinary, but it was dependable. I lived carefully, avoided unnecessary debt, and saved whenever possible. Helping family felt like the right thing to do. What bothered me wasn't the money. It was the attitude. The more I helped, the more expected it became. Nobody said thank you anymore. Nobody asked whether I could afford it. The conversations changed from requests to assumptions. If you could handle this bill, we'd appreciate it. Soon became, you'll take care of it, right? Every year the support grew larger. Every year the appreciation grew smaller. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly now. Whenever relatives talked about success, they praised my brother's business ideas. Whenever they discussed ambition, they celebrated other family members. I was simply the reliable person who fixed problems. The video exposed something I had never fully allowed myself to believe. They didn't respect me. They respected what I provided. And after hearing them laugh behind my back, I finally understood the difference. I watched the video again the next morning. Then I watched it a third time. Not because I enjoyed torturing myself, but because part of me kept hoping I had misunderstood something. Maybe the comments were taken out of context. Maybe there was a joke I hadn't heard before the recording started. Maybe there was some explanation that would make everything feel less personal. There wasn't. Every laugh was real. Every insult was deliberate. Every person at that table had chosen to participate. I paused the video repeatedly, studying faces I had known my entire life. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody seemed shocked by what was being said. The conversation flowed naturally, as if criticizing me was a completely normal part of family dinner. That realization hurt more than the words themselves. The video wasn't exposing a bad moment. It was exposing the truth. What bothered me most was knowing they never intended for me to see it. People are usually careful when they think someone might hear them. They choose their words. They hide their opinions. My family hadn't hidden anything. They believed I would never know. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and began reviewing financial records. At first, I only wanted a reminder of how much help I had provided over the years. But as I searched through bank statements and payment confirmations, the numbers kept growing. Mortgage payments, medical expenses, debt transfers, utility bills, emergency repairs, insurance shortfalls. I created a spreadsheet and started organizing everything by year. The total stunned even me. Some payments were small. Others were thousands of dollars. Together, they represented years of sacrifices I had barely thought about while making them. By evening, I sat staring at the completed records. The evidence was impossible to ignore. I could have called everyone immediately. I could have demanded explanations. I could have confronted them about the video. Instead, I closed the spreadsheet and shut my laptop. For the first time since receiving the recording, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I was simply going to stop protecting people who clearly didn't value me. The next payment was due in 8 days. Normally, I wouldn't have even thought about it. For nearly 6 years, helping my family had become part of my routine. A bill would appear, someone would call with a problem, and I would quietly make sure everything was handled before it became a crisis. This time was different. I opened my banking app and reviewed the automatic transfers scheduled for the end of the month. One payment covered part of my parents' mortgage. Another helped with a utility account that frequently fell behind. A third transfer went toward a debt my brother still hadn't fully repaid. Looking at the list felt strange. Not because of the money, because for the first time, I saw those payments differently. A week earlier, I would have viewed them as helping family. Now I saw them as support being given to people who openly mocked me when they thought I wasn't listening. I sat quietly at my desk for several minutes. Then I started canceling transfers, one by one. No dramatic speeches. No angry messages. No warnings. Just a series of clicks. The mortgage assistance disappeared first. Then the utility support. Then the monthly payment connected to my brother's debt. When I finished, the screen looked almost empty. A surprising sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't taking anything from them. I wasn't demanding repayment. I was simply stopping something I had voluntarily been doing for years. That night, my phone remained silent. The next day was the same. Nobody called. Nobody noticed. Life continued exactly as before. Meanwhile, the due dates kept getting closer. I went to work, cooked dinner, read a book before bed. From the outside, nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, a countdown had already begun. For years, I had quietly prevented financial problems before they reached my family. Now those problems would arrive exactly as scheduled. Part of me expected guilt. Instead, I felt clarity. The video had answered a question I didn't even realize I had been asking. How did they really see me? Now I knew. And once you know the truth, pretending becomes impossible. So I waited. Not for revenge. Not for an argument. Just for reality to catch up with people who had spent years believing help would always be there, no matter how badly they treated the person providing it. The first sign appeared 11 days later. It came in the form of a voicemail from my mother. I was finishing lunch at work when my phone buzzed. Her message sounded unusually tense. Call me when you get a chance. There's some kind of issue with the mortgage company. I listened twice before putting my phone away. An hour later, she called again. Then again that evening. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. I simply wanted to see what would happen when I stopped stepping in. 2 days later, my brother sent a text. You having banking issues? I stared at the message. A minute later, another one arrived. The debt payment didn't go through this month. No greeting. No concern. Just an assumption that something had gone wrong on my end. As the week continued, more problems surfaced. My parents received an overdue notice regarding the mortgage balance. A utility company sent a warning about a past due account. My brother started receiving calls from creditors again. For years, those issues had disappeared before they became serious. Now, they were finally reaching the people responsible for them. The reactions were almost predictable. My mother blamed the bank. My father blamed rising costs. My brother blamed an accounting error. Nobody considered the possibility that the payments had stopped intentionally. Nobody even asked whether I was still helping. That realization told me everything. In their minds, my support wasn't a gift. It was a permanent feature of their lives. Something as ordinary and dependable as electricity or running water. The calls became more frequent. Voicemails piled up. Texts arrived at all hours. The questions turned into complaints. Complaints turned into frustration. Meanwhile, I continued living my life. I went to work, met friends for dinner, finished projects I had been postponing for months. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying everyone else's financial emergencies on my shoulders. Yet despite all the growing pressure, I still said nothing. I never mentioned the video. I never explained my decision. I simply watched as reality slowly arrived at their doorstep. And with every overdue notice, every collection call, and every unanswered question, I began to understand something important. The people who called me a failure had absolutely no plan for surviving without me. The first direct request for money came 3 weeks after I canceled the payments. It arrived on a Tuesday evening. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. The relief in her voice was immediate. Oh, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy. There was a brief pause. Well, we have a situation. Of course they did. She explained that the mortgage company had issued another warning. Fees were accumulating. The account needed attention quickly. Then came the part she clearly assumed would solve everything. We just need a little help this month. A little help. The same phrase I had heard dozens of times before. I took a slow breath. I'm not able to do that. Silence. For a moment, I thought the call had disconnected. What do you mean? She finally asked. I mean I can't help. The confusion in her voice quickly turned into disbelief. You've always helped. I know. Another long silence followed. Then she changed tactics. We're family. The words landed differently now. For years that argument had worked. This time it didn't. I'm sorry, Mom. Before she could continue, I ended the call. 2 hours later, my brother called. Unlike my mother, he skipped the small talk completely. I need you to send the payment. No. What do you mean no? His voice rose immediately. The account is already behind. I understand. Then send it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he genuinely believed he could issue instructions. When I refused again, frustration turned into anger. After several minutes of accusations, he hung up. The next few days brought more calls, more messages, more urgency. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody wondered whether something had happened. Nobody expressed concern. They only wanted the payments restored. Their reactions confirmed what I had already suspected. They weren't shocked because I needed help. They were shocked because, for the first time, I wasn't providing it. And as their panic grew, so did something unexpected inside me. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Certainty. I had spent years solving problems for people who never truly valued the person solving them. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon. Not surprisingly, nobody asked whether I wanted to attend. I received a group text from my aunt that simply said, "Family dinner." Mom and Dad's house. 2 p.m. Be there. The message sounded less like an invitation and more like a summons. I almost declined. Then curiosity won. By the time I arrived, nearly everyone from the video was already there. My parents sat at the dining table. My brother leaned against the kitchen counter. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the room. The atmosphere felt tense. Nobody offered a warm greeting. Nobody asked how I had been. Instead, they watched me take a seat. My father spoke first. "We need to talk about what's going on." I nodded. "Okay." "The mortgage is falling behind," my mother added. My brother folded his arms. "And my account is a mess because the payment stopped." There it was. Not concern. Not conversation. An intervention about money. For the next 20 minutes, they took turns explaining their problems. Late fees. Debt notices. Unexpected expenses. Financial stress. Every story ended with the same unspoken expectation. Fix it. I listened quietly. Then the guilt tactics began. My aunt sighed dramatically. "Families are supposed to help each other." A cousin shook his head. "Everybody is struggling right now." My mother looked genuinely upset. "We always thought we could count on you." That sentence nearly made me laugh. Count on me. Not appreciate me. Not respect me. Count on me. The distinction mattered. When emotional appeals failed, frustration started creeping into the conversation. My brother leaned forward. "You know, all of this could be solved if you'd just start helping again." Helping. The word sounded strange now, as if years of financial support had been reduced to a simple obligation. Then came the accusation I hadn't expected. My father frowned. "Honestly, this feels selfish." Several relatives nodded. Selfish. After years of paying bills that weren't mine. After sacrificing savings, vacations, and personal goals. I looked around the room. The same faces from the video. The same people who laughed when I was called a failure. For the first time that afternoon, I realized something important. They still didn't understand what was happening. They thought this meeting was about money. They had no idea the real conversation hadn't started yet. I didn't say much for the rest of the meeting. While my family continued discussing overdue bills and financial pressure, I sat quietly and listened. Every complaint sounded strangely familiar. For years, I had heard versions of the same stories. Emergencies. Unexpected expenses. Temporary setbacks. The difference was that now nobody had a safety net. When the conversation finally ended, I went home without making any promises. The next morning, before work, I opened the spreadsheet I had created days earlier. Then I started expanding it. If my family wanted answers, I intended to be ready. I pulled bank statements from old accounts, downloaded payment confirmations, collected emails, receipts, and transaction records. At first, the process felt routine. Then, the numbers started growing. One mortgage payment became 23. One emergency expense became dozens. A utility bill here. A medical invoice there. Debt payments scattered across multiple years. Every document told the same story. Whenever a problem appeared, I had quietly stepped in. By lunchtime, my dining table was covered with organized folders. One folder for my parents. One for my brother. One for miscellaneous family expenses. I wasn't preparing for an argument. I was preparing for the truth. That evening, I began creating a timeline. Year by year. Month by month. Every payment was listed alongside the reason behind it. The timeline stretched far longer than I expected. Looking at it felt surreal. Certain years contained dozens of entries. I could practically track my family's crises through the records alone. What shocked me most wasn't the total amount. It was how consistently the support had continued. There were birthdays when I postponed personal purchases to cover someone else's debt. Vacations I never took because emergency expenses appeared first. Savings goals I delayed because family problems always seemed more urgent. And through all of it, I had rarely complained. By midnight, the ledger was complete. Every dollar was documented. Every transfer supported by evidence. Every sacrifice recorded. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the final page. For years, my family had viewed my help as something automatic. Now I held proof of exactly what that help looked like. If the time came, there would be no debate, no confusion, No rewritten history, just facts. And facts, unlike family opinions, don't change when they're inconvenient. 3 days after the family meeting, my phone started ringing again. This time, I answered. My mother sounded exhausted. "We need to talk." An hour later, I was sitting in my parents' living room. The atmosphere felt different from the previous gathering. The frustration was still there, but now it was mixed with desperation. My father sat in his usual chair, arms crossed. My brother paced near the window. Several relatives had shown up again. Apparently, this had become a family crisis. The moment I sat down, the questions began. When are you going to start helping again? How long is this going to continue? Do you realize how much stress this is causing? One after another. The same theme repeated. Money, bills, payments, problems. Finally, my brother stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Why are you doing this?" The room fell quiet. Everyone waited. For weeks, I had listened. For weeks, I had stayed silent. Now it was my turn to speak. I folded my hands calmly. "Can I ask a question first?" Nobody answered immediately. Then my mother nodded. "Fine." I looked around the room. At every familiar face. Every person who claimed to care about family. Then I asked the simplest question I could think of. Why would a pathetic failure keep paying everyone's bills? The silence was immediate. My brother frowned. My father looked confused. My aunt suddenly became very interested in the floor. I continued. "If I'm such a disappointment, why were you comfortable accepting my help for years?" Nobody spoke. So I asked another question. "If I'm selfish, why was I the one paying mortgage balances, medical expenses, and debts that didn't belong to me?" The tension in the room changed instantly. The conversation was no longer about overdue payments. It was about accountability. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father shifted uncomfortably. For the first time since all of this started, nobody seemed confident. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't accusing anyone. I was simply asking questions. Questions nobody wanted to answer. Because every honest answer led to the same uncomfortable truth. Their financial problems weren't the real issue. The real issue was that they had spent years benefiting from someone they secretly looked down on. And now that person had finally stopped pretending not to notice. The room remained silent. Not because they lacked words, because they knew exactly where the conversation was heading next. Nobody answered my last question. The silence stretched across the room like a heavy fog. My father stared at the carpet. My brother avoided eye contact. Even the relatives who usually had opinions about everything suddenly became quiet. I let the silence sit. Then I reached into my bag. My aunt noticed first. "What are you doing?" I pulled out my tablet and placed it on the coffee table. "I think it's time everyone saw something." A feeling of unease spread through the room. My aunt's expression changed immediately, almost as if she already knew. I unlocked the screen and opened the video. The same video. The one that had accidentally landed in my inbox 3 weeks earlier. My mother's eyes widened. My brother froze. My aunt looked like she wanted to disappear. Without saying a word, I pressed play. The room filled with familiar voices. At first, nobody reacted. Then, the comments started. My brother's voice. "I still can't believe she's doing that job. Honestly, it's kind of sad." A cousin laughed. Then came the sentence that had changed everything. "She's always been a pathetic failure compared to everyone else." The recording continued. Every laugh, every insult, every careless remark. Now, they were hearing their own words exactly as I had heard them. Nobody interrupted the video. Nobody asked me to stop it. They simply listened. The confidence they had shown earlier vanished with every passing second. When my father's voice declared that I was lucky to be included in family events, he visibly winced. When my mother joked that I should be grateful anyone tolerated me, tears began forming in her eyes. The video ended. The room remained completely silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. Finally, my brother cleared his throat. "You weren't supposed to see that." Of all the things he could have said, that was his choice. Not an apology. Not regret. Just surprise that he had been caught. A cousin tried speaking next. "It was only a joke." Nobody believed that. Not even the people saying it. Excuses started appearing one after another. We didn't mean it. It wasn't serious. People say things. But the damage was already done. The recording had removed every possibility of denial. They couldn't claim misunderstanding. They couldn't rewrite history. For the first time, everyone in that room was forced to confront something uncomfortable. I hadn't imagined their disrespect. I had proof.
And now, so did they?
For a long moment after the video ended, nobody spoke. The excuses had already started, but they sounded weak even to the people making them. The confidence that filled the room earlier had disappeared completely. I looked around at my family. Then I opened my bag again. My brother frowned. What now? Instead of answering, I pulled out a thick stack of folders and placed them on the coffee table. The room grew quiet. My father glanced at the paperwork. What's all that? Records. Nobody seemed to understand. So I opened the first folder. This is every mortgage payment I helped cover over the last 6 years. I slid several pages across the table. My mother's eyes dropped to the numbers. Her face immediately changed. Then I opened another folder. Medical expenses. Another. Utility bills. Another. Debt payments. The room became silent again. This silence felt different. Heavier. I handed my brother a packet containing transaction records connected to his debts. He flipped through the pages slowly. The color drained from his face. I wasn't finished. Next came the spreadsheet. Every payment. Every date. Every amount. Organized year by year. The total sat at the bottom of the final page. When my father reached that number, he stopped reading. My mother covered her mouth. A cousin whispered, "That's impossible." "It isn't," I replied calmly. Every figure was supported by statements, receipts, confirmations, and bank records. Nothing was estimated. Nothing was exaggerated. For years, I had quietly carried financial burdens that belonged to other people. And now those years were sitting on the table in black and white. My brother stared at the ledger. "You paid all of this?" I nodded. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody made jokes. Nobody called me a failure. The room that once treated me like an afterthought suddenly looked at me differently. Not because I had changed, because the truth had finally become visible. My mother's voice trembled. "We didn't know." That statement almost made me laugh. Of course they didn't know. They had never asked. They never wanted details. They simply accepted the help and moved on. For years, they assumed support would always be there. Now, they were staring at the full cost of that assumption. And for the first time since receiving the video, I could see genuine realizations spreading across the room. The story they had told themselves about me was collapsing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable for everyone. The video had exposed the truth. The financial records had confirmed it. Now reality was taking over. Bills continued arriving. Mortgage notices didn't disappear because someone felt guilty. Utility companies still expected payment. Creditors still made their calls. For the first time in years, my family had to face problems without assuming I would quietly solve them. At first, they resisted. My brother complained constantly. Every conversation seemed to circle back to how difficult things had become. My father grumbled about expenses. My mother worried about overdue balances and budgets. Several relatives hinted that I should reconsider my decision. But something had changed. I no longer felt responsible for fixing everything. For years, I had mistaken responsibility for love. Now I understood the difference. Love supports people. Responsibility for other adults' choices can become a burden. As the months passed, my family slowly began adapting. My parents met with a financial advisor. They created a realistic budget for the first time in years. Unnecessary expenses were reduced. Old habits were questioned. My brother took on additional work. He stopped waiting for rescue and started addressing his debt directly. The process wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were frustrations. There were arguments among family members.
But there was also progress.
Small at first, then increasingly noticeable. What surprised me most was how quickly entitlement disappeared once support was no longer automatic. People become resourceful when they have no alternative. The same relatives who once acted helpless suddenly found solutions. Payment plans appeared. Budgets emerged. Priorities shifted. Meanwhile, my own life felt lighter. I wasn't monitoring overdue accounts. I wasn't transferring money every time a crisis appeared. I wasn't sacrificing my goals to manage someone else's emergencies. For the first time in years, I focused on myself. I restarted projects I had postponed, added to my savings account, made plans without calculating how much family assistance might be needed next month. The freedom felt unfamiliar, but it also felt healthy. Occasionally, guilt tried to creep back in. Then I remembered the video, the laughter, the insults, the complete lack of respect. And the guilt disappeared. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was simply a boundary. A necessary one. Because helping people should never require accepting disrespect. And sometimes the most important lesson a family can learn is that support is a privilege, not an entitlement. For the first time in a very long time, everyone was finally learning that lesson. About a month after the meeting, my aunt called. Not a text. Not a group message. An actual phone call. The moment I answered, I could hear nervousness in her voice. I owe you an apology. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she continued. When I sent that video, it was an accident. But honestly, the accident wasn't the worst part. I listened quietly. The worst part is that I sat there and laughed too. The admission sounded genuine. Not defensive. Not rehearsed. Just honest. For the first time since all of this began, someone was taking responsibility without trying to explain it away. I should have said something, she continued. You didn't deserve any of that. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a while. The conversation didn't erase what happened, but it mattered. A week later, my parents asked if they could meet me for lunch. I almost declined. Eventually, I agreed. The restaurant was quiet. My mother looked older than I remembered. My father seemed unusually uncomfortable. After a few minutes of small talk, my mother finally spoke. We were wrong. Simple words. Words I had waited years to hear. My father nodded. A few days later, my brother called. We got used to your help. Too used to it, my mother added. Neither of them tried blaming stress. Neither of them offered excuses. For once, they simply acknowledged the truth. The conversation wasn't emotional. There were no dramatic speeches. Just accountability. And somehow, that felt more meaningful. A few days later, my brother called. His apology was the hardest to earn. For weeks after the meeting, he had remained defensive. Now his tone sounded different. I've been looking through those records again, he admitted. I waited. I didn't realize how much you actually did. There was a pause. Then came words I never expected to hear. I'm sorry, not because he needed money, not because he wanted something, because he finally understood. As these conversations continued, one thing became clear. People can apologize. People can regret their actions. But trust doesn't automatically return. I listened carefully to every apology. I appreciated the honesty. Yet I also remembered the laughter in that video. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. One can happen quickly. The other takes time. And after everything that had happened, time was the one thing nobody could ask me to rush. The lunch with my parents ended on a surprisingly peaceful note. For the first time in years, nobody asked me for money. Nobody hinted at financial problems. Nobody expected me to solve anything. But I knew one conversation and a few apologies wouldn't automatically change old habits. Patterns that develop over years don't disappear overnight. So, I decided it was time to establish boundaries. Real boundaries. The kind I should have created long ago. A week later, I invited my parents and brother to meet again. Nothing formal. Just a conversation. Once everyone sat down, I spoke calmly. I need to be clear about something. They listened. I'm not going back to the way things were. Nobody interrupted. For the first time, they seemed willing to hear me out. I love all of you, I continued, but I won't be managing anyone else's finances anymore. My brother nodded slowly. My parents exchanged a glance. Then my father asked the question I expected. What if there's a real emergency? It was a fair question. For years, nearly every request had been labeled an emergency. I thought carefully before answering. If something truly serious happens, we'll discuss it. But automatic support is over. The words felt firm without being cruel. My mother sighed. I could tell she didn't love the answer, but she accepted it. Not everyone did. Over the next few weeks, a few relatives made comments. Some suggested I was being too strict. Others implied family should always sacrifice for one another. Years earlier, those comments would have made me second-guess myself. Now they didn't, because I finally understood something important. Healthy relationships require boundaries. Without them, generosity becomes expectation, and expectation eventually becomes entitlement. As time passed, resistance slowly faded. My parents continued managing their budget. My brother stayed focused on paying down debt. Life moved forward. Not perfectly, but honestly. The strangest part was how much better our conversations became. Without money hanging over every interaction, we actually talked. About work, about hobbies, about ordinary life. Things families are supposed to discuss. The pressure that had quietly existed for years began disappearing. For the first time, our relationships weren't built around financial dependence. They were built around choice. And that made all the difference. The video that nearly destroyed my connection with my family had unexpectedly revealed something valuable. Respect cannot be purchased. And neither can healthy relationships. Both require honesty, accountability, and boundaries. Finally, we were starting to build those things together. A year after everything changed, life looked very different. My parents were managing their finances without outside help. It hadn't been easy, but they had adapted. They followed a budget, tracked expenses, and planned ahead instead of waiting for someone else to solve problems. My brother had made significant progress on his debt. For the first time in years, he talked about financial goals instead of financial emergencies. Most importantly, nobody expected me to rescue them anymore. The shift wasn't dramatic. It happened gradually, one responsible decision at a time. Meanwhile, my own life improved in ways I hadn't anticipated. The money I once spent covering other people's obligations remained in my savings account. Projects I had postponed finally moved forward. I traveled more, spent time with friends, invested in hobbies I had neglected for years. The constant pressure I once carried quietly disappeared. I hadn't realized how exhausting it was until it was gone. One afternoon, nearly a year after the video surfaced, my family gathered for another dinner. The atmosphere felt completely different from the recording that had started everything. There was no tension, no hidden resentment, no expectation hanging in the air. At one point, my father set down his glass and looked across the table. "I owe you something." Everyone became quiet. He shook his head slowly. "Not money, an acknowledgement." I listened. "For years, we judged you without understanding what you were doing for everyone." My mother nodded. "We confused kindness with obligation." My brother looked embarrassed. "And we took you for granted." Those words meant more than any repayment ever could. Not because they erased the past. Nothing could do that. But because they represented something that had been missing for years. Honesty. For a long time, I thought the lesson of the story was about money, the bills,
The debt.
the support. But looking back now, I realize it was never really about finances.
It was about respect.
People often assume generosity means weakness. They mistake reliability for endless availability. They become so accustomed to help that they stop appreciating the person providing it. My family made that mistake. For years, I made one too. I believed love required unlimited sacrifice. Now I know better. Love can be generous without becoming self-destructive. Kindness can exist alongside boundaries. And respect matters far more than gratitude spoken only after consequences arrive. As dinner ended that evening, I looked around the table. The relationships weren't perfect, but they were honest. And honesty was worth far more than the role I once played. The person they called a failure hadn't changed. What changed was that I finally stopped allowing others to decide my value. And that made all the difference.